Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. Let me make sure everything is good. I'm seeing green all around and my sound look like it is maxed out. Good. And I'm seeing my picture moving and shaking. Excellent. Guys, so first, hello everyone. I think I've said that part already. Guys, when I start this, I want to thank you guys for all of my patrons and all of the people who give Super Cash. It is immensely appreciated. It's one of those things I don't necessarily designate all that often, but I do want you guys to know that I do appreciate it. This one is going to be on democratic values. So, I analyze politics. And I do this often. My wife often says it's the other woman sometimes. And being the other woman and doing the analysis of politics, I am stuck listening to Tom Perez consistently scream about his values. The problem with this and the aggravation with this is that nobody knows what those values are. So I'm stuck in this position of looking at the situation, meaning looking at what Democrats do to try to discern what their values are. Now, I suspect that if you ask Donna Brazile, or if you ask one of the other Democrat reformers or one of the sheepdogs, that they would give you a different impression. But I want to focus specifically this time on Kamala Harris. If you're going to hold up her as being, this kind of corporate choice, this African-American of mixed identity that may be running in 2020, then we should take a look at that. And I don't want you to think I'm just picking on Kamala Harris. This is based on a tweet that Kamala Harris put out today. So let's take a look at this tweet. Let's see. The for-profit prison business is a billion-dollar industry. We can't let corporations keep exploiting human lives for profit. Kamala Harris. There's a check by her name, so you know it's her. The for-profit prison business is a billion-dollar industry. We can't let corporations keep exploiting human lives for profit. I agree with this. I agree with this. I look at this stuff from the perspective of somewhat of a humanist perspective. One of my main things is this idea of wanting to be free. I want to be left to my devices. I've raged and I've bitched at this idea of people being stuck working 40, 50 hours a week at a job that they hate and calling that in any way freedom. I hate that. I don't necessarily think that if you're spending your time completely alienated from your labor, hating what you do, that in any way can be called free. I mean, ultimately, you've chosen a plantation and you're stuck with that particular plantation because of bills and debt and all this other stuff associated with just needing to exist in your society. Now, so you can imagine that going beyond the 40, 50 hours, and you're talking about putting somebody in a cage. Oh man, yes, I greatly dislike that. So yeah, I agree with the sentiment. The question becomes, however, though, does Kamala Harris agree with that sentiment? Does the Democratic Party agree with that sentiment expressed through Kamala Harris, since she is considered one of the 2020 hopefuls? If you're telling me that the for-profit prison business is a billion-dollar industry, we can't let corporations keep exploiting human lives. Let's skip the first part. Let's go to the second sentence. You can't let corporations keep exploiting human lives for profit. And if you scream to me about your values, and I know, as a Democratic Party, you guys put through Obamacare, leaving leeches into the system itself, leaving corporate interests into the system itself, into the medical system, in order to exploit human lives, literally to exploit human lives for their own profit. They're leeches. They're completely unnecessary. You let drug companies, in the process, allowing them, again, to exploit human lives for profit. If you're going to scream to me about your values and your big achievement, meaning the Democratic Party, your biggest achievement over the last few years was Obamacare, and it left millions of people off the healthcare rolls. It continued to allow corporations to exploit human beings for profit from the drug company standpoint and from a healthcare standpoint. It gets some across about your values, but I don't think it's getting across with your values what you think it does. Let's stay with Kamala Harris for the moment. And let's look at this quote again. The for-profit prison business is a billion-dollar industry. We can't let corporations keep exploiting human lives for profit. Oh, she sounds serious. She's, you know, she's fighting for the worker man, for just average man. And just to put a finer point on it, we have 5% of the world's population with 25% of the world's prison population in our jails. Land of the free. So I hear that quote, and I started looking further into Kamala Harris. Well, is she this champion for the guy who's in prison, the prison man, the prisoner? Is she a champion for the everyday man dealing with the corporate state and dealing with the prison industry? Let's say it that way. And for that matter, there's no way you can talk about the prison industry without talking about cops and the law and the way that the law interacts with the human beings in our society. So what is Kamala Harris's position on that stuff? It's interesting. I'm glad that you asked. This is Mother Jones. 30% of California firefighters are prisoners. Okay. Now this is August 14, 2015. As you scroll down, you get to this part. Prison reform advocates have raised concerns that the state is so reliant on cheap labor of inmate firefighters that policymakers may be slow to adopt prison reforms as a result. The concern was magnified last fall when lawyers for the state attorney general Kamala Harris argued that extending an early prison release program to all minimum custody inmates at this time would severely impact fire camp participation, a dangerous outcome while California is in the middle of a difficult fire season and severe drought. Understand what's being said. In the other quote, we shouldn't allow people to be exploited for their labor. We shouldn't allow corporations to be exploited for their labor. I mean, prisoners to be exploited for their labor. And in this particular case, Kamala Harris's office is arguing that allowing early prison release is going to hurt us because we're not going to have bodies to fight fires in California. That sounds like exploitation to me. And it sounds like exploitation in one of the worst ways. Meaning, no, we're not going to let these people out of prison. We're not going to let them out of their cages because we need them as the state to go out and fight fires for us. Now, Harris, later on, when people, I guess, when this information came out that her office was arguing this point, later on, she comes back and says that she was troubled by the argument and that the state has ruled that the minimum custody inmates, including firefighters, are eligible for programs so as long as it proves not to deplete the number of inmate firefighters. At the end of the day, though, this sounds like her office is making an argument saying, we need to keep these people in prison because we need them to fight fires. What was the other quote that she said? The for-profit prison business is a billion-dollar industry. We can't let corporations keep exploiting human lives for profit. Is it okay for the state to exploit human lives for profit? Meaning, you're making this case that minimum custody inmates need to stay in prison because we need them to fight fires. And that letting those people out in the way that you would typically let those people out would hurt the state of California because the state of California doesn't want to pay for the regular people to fight fires. We get these guys on the cheap. We don't let these people out in this way. Let's keep going. There's more. Kamala Harris backs cops stealing property. Now, the legal term for this is called citizen forfeiture or asset forfeiture. Ultimately, a cop can steal your property without you being convicted of any crime at all. He would just confiscate your property. In Alabama, there was a recent case where the state or people in a local town was essentially being raped by the cops in the judicial system as they came up with a scam in order to steal property from the people of that particular town, that town in Alabama. In this particular case, Kamala Harris backs this particular policy. It is an amazing policy. In the home of the free, land of the free, home of the brave, cops can stop you and without any cause whatsoever, just based on their own decision-making process, steal your property. If it's $50, if it's $100, if it's $2,000, they can steal your property. The majority of people do not get that property back, by the way. You don't have to be convicted of a crime. Let's go back to the original quote. The for-profit prison business is a billion-dollar industry. We can't let corporations keep exploiting human lives for profit. Whether it's a corporation, whether it's a cop, whether it's a town, whether it's the state of California, why should you allow any of this to exploit these human lives for the profit of any of these things? I mean, ultimately, Kamala Harris is making this quote like she's standing on the side of just regular human beings and civil liberties, while at the same token arguing, outright arguing, or at the very least her office argued that we need to keep people in prison because we need those people to fight fires. And at the same token, we need to leave the capacity of cops to steal property from human beings. Let's keep going. There's more. There's more. Let's see. Which one is this? This is Los Angeles Times. Federal judge orders California to expand their prison release program. This is November of 2014. Federal judge orders California to expand its prisoner release program. Most of those prisoners now work as, well, let's read the top. Federal judge on Friday ordered California to launch a new parole program that could free more prisoners early, ruling the state had failed to fully implement an order last February intended to reduce unconstitutional crowding. California has so many people in its prisons that they're effectively overcrowded, and it was deemed, I guess, unconstitutional for that, and they were ordered to release those prisoners. Now, I did a report earlier today showing that the overwhelming majority, there are more people arrested for pot than all the violent crimes combined. Meaning most of those people in those California jails are likely in there just for drug crimes. It's fucking amazing. Now, the amazing part of this, that's good on the judge. Most of the prisoners now work as groundskeepers, janitors, and in-prison kitchens with wages that range from 8 cents to 37 cents per hour. Lawyers for Attorney General Kamala Harris, well, let's show it. I don't know what you think, I'm making it up. Kamala Harris had argued in court that if forced to release these inmates early, prisons will lose an important labor pool. Well, that's interesting. That's interesting. What was her original quote? The for-profit prison business is a billion-dollar industry. We can't let corporations keep exploiting human lives for profit. Now, I've seen multiple cases now. I haven't even finished. I have a shitload of these panels where Kamala Harris or her office is backing exploiting human beings for the profit of either the state, the police department, or, in this case, the prisons themselves. Most of the prisoners now work as groundskeepers, janitors, and in-prison kitchens with wages that range from 8 cents to 37 cents per hour. That's abysmal. Lawyers for Attorney General Kamala Harris had argued in court that if forced to release these inmates early, prisoners or prisons would lose an important labor pool. I understand that we're supposed to release this person early because we're breaking, essentially, keeping him here is somewhat unconstitutional. I understand that. But you can understand that if we let this guy out of his cage, that the judge has deemed to be this kind of unconstitutional confinement, if we let him out of his cage, we're not going to be able to get labor for 8 to 37 cents. You're going to hurt us economically by letting this person out of his cage. Kamala Harris. Let's keep going. When Democrats are screaming about their values, I'm stuck with this thing of saying, okay, I have no idea what their values are. Let's look at what they do. And let's look at the people who they raise up, that they themselves want to run or that they express interest in running. Well, this African American has an abysmal record when it comes to civil liberties. Her making this quote that the for-profit prison business is a billion-dollar industry, we can't let corporations keep exploiting human lives for profit. I'm surprised her fingers and her computer didn't set on fire. It should have set on fire. If there was a God, she would have burst into flames. Let's keep going. And that's the other part, right? Perfectly okay with keeping people in prison. Perfectly okay with making the argument that we need to keep people in prison because they're cheap labor. Or at the very least, her office is okay with making that argument. She acts stunned that her office made that argument. She's Attorney General, but apparently she didn't know that that was the argument that was being made. Whatever. That was the argument that her office made. That was the argument that she made. In this particular case, she's okay with keeping some in prison, but she doesn't want to go after others. Well, that's fucking fascinating. So, Steve Munich broke the law. His company repeatedly broke the law. One West Bank, which this is the Intercept. Treasury nominee Steve Mnuchin's bank accused of widespread misconduct and leaked memo. Donald Trump's nominee for Treasury Secretary, Steve Mnuchin, ran from 2009 to 2015, repeatedly broke California's foreclosure laws. During that period, according to a previously undisclosed 2013 memo from top prosecutors in the state attorney general's office. The memo, obtained by The Intercept, alleged that One West rushed delinquent homeowners out of their homes by violating notice and waiting period statutes, illegally backdated key documents, and effectively gamed foreclosure auctions. In the memo, leaders of the state attorney general's consumer law section said they uncovered evidence suggestive of widespread misconduct. In a year-long investigation, and a detailed 22-page request, they identified over 1,000 legal violations in small subsection of One West loans that were able to examine, and they recommended that Attorney General Kamala Harris file a civil enforcement action against the Pasadena-based bank. They even wrote up a sample legal complaint seeking injunctive relief and millions of dollars in penalties. But Harris's office, without any explanation, declined to prosecute the case. She's okay with keeping people in prison because those people need to, they're cheap labor. She's okay with allowing people, or her office is okay with allowing cops, or I should say, keeping people in prison in order to fight fires. That's fucking amazing. And she's okay with cops stealing property from other human beings, other citizens of this country in the land of the free. But in this case, when white-collar crime came up, she passes. She passes on it. And hey, from her standpoint, maybe it's a good thing that she did pass, because of this. Kamala Harris was the only 2016 Senate Democratic candidate to get cash from Steve Mnuchin. In the 2016 election cycle, Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin donated to only one Democratic candidate. But it wasn't Joe Manchin of West Virginia, the only Democrat who voted to confirm him for the position Monday night, and who is up for re-election next year. It was freshman Senator Kamala Harris of California, who has her own history with the new cabinet official and voted against Munich's nomination. You don't really have to vote against him at that point, because you let him off legally. You had the opportunity to go after white-collar crime. The guy was foreclosing on homes early, meaning he was kicking people out of their homes, human beings being evicted out of their homes. You have this weird irony where she's okay with keeping people in prison, and in situations where people are being evicted and kicked out of their homes, she doesn't necessarily want to do anything to back up and protect those people, or at the very least prosecute, in order to try to balance the scales. There's more. Let's keep going. Democratic values in action. Democratic values in action. Kamala Harris says she's for increased transparency in law enforcement. That's great. She's for increased transparency. But Attorney General Kamala Harris has opposed legislation that will require her office to independently investigate fatal police shootings. Harris also stopped short of endorsing statewide regulations on the use of police body cameras, saying she believed all officers should wear them, but that local agencies are best equipped to enact policies. So here, again, we're back at democratic values. Tom Perez and many of the other Democrats, including Chuck Schumer, hey, we believe that health care should be a right. That's great, Chuck. What are you going to do about it? Oh, well, that's different. We just believe that. We're not going to say we're going to do anything about it. Kamala Harris, we believe that there should be transparency in the way that, there should be more transparency in the legal process. But that does not mean I'm going to do anything about that. I just believe it. It's like I believe in unicorns. I just believe it. Doesn't mean I'm going to enact any legislation. Doesn't mean I'm going to take any action. I just believe it. It's esoteric. It's just in the thought space. It's just in my thought space. It's fucking amazing. Absolutely fucking amazing. So, again, let's go back to the original quote. I want to keep the original quote in people's mind as we go through this. The for-profit prison business is a billion-dollar industry. We can't let corporations keep exploiting human lives for profit. Now, we can't let corporations do it, but her office argued that it was okay with keeping inmates in prison because we need those inmates to fight fires. So the state can exploit those inmates and keep them in prison during that exploitation. It is okay for cops and localities to steal property from human beings. So that apparently is okay for Kamala Harris, without being charged with a crime, by the way. Her office, again, we need to keep these people in prison who work for 8 to 37 cents an hour, because if they were released early, they will lose an important labor pool. White-collar crime. Now, in this tweet, she seemed to be apparently against this idea of corporations exploiting human beings for their profits. But in this other case, when a human being or a corporation was exploiting those human beings for their profit, and she had the opportunity to go after that human being or that particular company, she passes. She passes. And as a reward for her passing, what do you know? You get money. You got money. You got a reward. Hey, thanks for not putting me in prison. Here's some money for your campaign. Let's keep going. It's fucking amazing. Oh, yeah. And even though we don't want corporations exploiting human beings for their labor, yeah, we're okay with cops stealing property from people. We're also okay with cops not having body cameras on. Because if you tell me that, hey, I believe that people should wear body cameras, but no, I'm not going to do anything about it, then you really don't believe that people should wear body cameras, particularly if you have the capacity to do something about it. What you believe, if it's not enacted, particularly if you have the power to enact it, it's not actually a belief. And the other part, independently investigate police shootings. Yeah, we don't want to do that either. A cop murders a person. A cop steals a person's property. And Kamala Harris is okay with giving this stuff a pass and not wanting to do anything about it. Let's keep going. There's more. Talking about the cop killing, Kamala Harris, 10 people were arrested at Attorney General Kamala Harris's office in Oakland. Now that's interesting. Why did Kamala Harris arrest 10 people? And mind you, dealing with Kamala Harris, it is dangerous to be arrested because Kamala Harris doesn't want to let you out of prison. I mean, ultimately, if you're arrested under Kamala Harris, she's going to use you as cheap labor, or at the very least, she's going to argue, or her office is going to argue, that you're a good source of cheap labor, and because you're a good source of cheap labor, you need to stay in prison. Or fight fires. That's the other one, or fight fires. But in this case, these brave souls got arrested at Kamala Harris's office. They got arrested because they were protesting the murder of an unarmed 18-year-old. They were protesting the murder of a child. Let's take a look at the story. Kamala Harris couldn't bring herself to bring charges or arrest the cop that murdered that kid, but she could bring it upon herself to get those people out of that office, get those people arrested. 10 arrests at AG Kamala, Attorney General's Kamala Harris's Oakland office. A protest of more than 100 people, including dozens of family members of Californians murdered by police outside of Kamala Harris's office at the state building in Oakland, ended with 10 arrests. Dan Siegel, Oakland civil rights attorney and mayoral candidate, spoke at a rally and said afterwards of the arrests, "The real crime is Kamala Harris refusing to prosecute officers like Miguel Masso, who racially profiled and murdered an 18-year-old African-American resident, Alan Buford." The arrest occurred when protesters refused to vacate the lobby of the state building in Oakland, insisting on first speaking to a representative of Harris's office. Here are excerpts from the letter activists attempted to deliver to her office. They wanted to deliver a letter. "On behalf of Justice for Alan Buford Coalition, we request that you exercise your authority to open a criminal investigation into the killing of Alan Buford by Oakland police officer Miguel Masso on May 6, 2012. Despite overwhelming evidence that Officer Masso committed multiple acts of misconduct in connection with Alan's death, the Alameda County District Attorney has failed to initiate criminal proceedings and has instead exonerated Officer Masso without conducting any meaningful inquiry into his actions. We urge you to exercise your authority under the Article 5, Section 13 of the California Constitution and Governmental Code 55 to conduct an independent investigation into the circumstances of Alan Buford's death." Now, the interesting part of this is, like I said, she was opposed to legislation that would require her office to independently investigate fatal police shootings. And what do you know? Here's a fatal police shooting that she doesn't want to investigate and doesn't want to do anything about. To get a little bit more information on the murder, Family of teen killed by Oakland police receives $110,000 settlement. A $110,000 settlement for family of a teen shot and killed by an Oakland police officer more than 2 years ago was approved by the Oakland City Council Tuesday night, the family attorney confirmed today. I have to be honest, though. That's not enough. That's not enough. You have these maniacs with badges roaming the streets and able to kill with impunity, with the legal apparatus itself completely giving these guys a free pass. This African American, or this person of color, I don't know what her gender is, and I shouldn't keep calling her African American, I'm joking about her race. But a person of color is murdered by a cop. Is murdered by a cop. And you would think that a person who's, I guess, of that particular demographic, or of a similar demographic, or a similar look like it at the very least, would be somewhat sensitive to that. Or another person of color would be a little bit more sensitive to that. Not so much. Not only was she not going to bring charges for something like that, she was against independent investigations of cop murders in cases like this. That being said, despite her being against it, despite her not wanting to bring charges, despite this guy being unarmed, murdered by a cop, the cops lied about the fact that he was unarmed, and then comes around and says, okay, he was unarmed. We shot an unarmed man. We killed an unarmed man. The city council at the very least said, okay, you're right. You got us. Here's $110,000 for your troubles. They took a fucking life. It took somebody's life. Just like they've been taking lives all throughout the country. If you compare the murders by cops in the United States compared to everywhere else in the world, we blow them away. Land of the free, where cops can essentially murder with impunity. We blow other countries away. These people are maniacs. You have somebody who's giving cops the authority to steal property, to try to keep people in prison longer than what those people need to be in, because A, either they want to exploit their labor, or B, they want to exploit their labor to fight forest fires. And in this case, when one of the citizens of her state gets murdered, and when she has the capacity to do something, as the powers vested in her as Attorney General, she turns her back on him. She turns her back on him. Let's take a look at a little bit more of this. A district attorney's office report said Bluefield did have a gun and pointed it at the officer, prompting Massa to fire his gun 4 times. The family's lawsuit filed in July 2012 disputes that version of events, claiming that Massa shot Bluefield 3 times after he tripped and fallen on the ground and was on his back trying to get up. The gun police said he was carrying was found 20 feet away from Buford's body, according to the lawsuit. The shooting prompted widespread protests in Oakland, including heated city council meetings where crowds of protesters shouted down council members to the point where at least one meeting had to be prematurely adjourned. Buford's father and mother, Adam and Geraldine Buford, have been active in the protests, demanding documents to further explain the circumstances of her son's death. Now, let me see. Let me read this part again. And maybe I misunderstood. Alan Buford, 18, was shot by police, Miguel Massa, shortly after midnight on May 6, 2012, during a foot chase near 92nd Avenue and Birch Street in Oakland, East Oakland. Police initially said that he was shot in an exchange of gunfire that also injured Massa, but later acknowledged that Buford did not fire a gun, and Massa had shot his own self in the foot. That's embarrassing. That's embarrassing. Essentially, he was so incompetent, he ended up shooting himself in the foot and tried to say that the other guy shot him. He was too embarrassed to say he shot himself. Fucking amazing. Fucking amazing. A district attorney's office report said Buford did not have a gun and pointed it at the officer, prompting Massa to fire his gun 4 times. Yeah, so this story is somewhat questionable. I guess my point is, he shot the guy after he fell and tripped. Let me just read it again. The family's lawsuit filed on July 2012 disputes that version of events, claiming Massa shot Buford 3 times after he had tripped and fallen on the ground and was on his back trying to get up. Essentially a clumsy cop that shot himself in the foot and ends up murdering somebody at 18, murdering a child. The gun police said he was carrying was found 20 feet away from Bluford's body. He was carrying a gun that was 20 feet away from him. Kamala Harris protected this guy. Let's keep going. There's more. Kamala Harris also expanded the amount of arrest and drug laws, meaning the conviction rate went from 56% to 76% under Kamala Harris's watch. Now, the problem with this is that, again, expanding the prison population, putting more people in cages. Thanks, Kamala Harris. Good job. And most of these people are drug crimes, drug laws. Let's look at the drug laws. Does Kamala Harris know that the drug war was meant to target blacks and hippies? Does she know that? Was Obama aware of that? Were Democrats aware of that? And if Democrats were aware of that, and they still went along with this, putting more people in cages, one person after the next, ruining their lives, putting them in cages, human beings in fucking cages. If they understood that the drug war was to lock up blacks and hippies and that was the plan, why are they continuing to persist and following something that the pretext of it had nothing to do with actual drugs at all? Kamala Harris is putting more people in prison. This is Nixon aide reportedly admitted drug war was meant to target blacks. It was blacks and hippies, but yeah, we can say blacks. John Ehrlichman, who served 18 months in prison for his role as Watergate scandal, was Nixon's chief domestic advisor when the president announced the war on drugs in 1971. The administration cited a high death toll and negative social impacts of drugs to justify expanding federal drug control agencies. Doing so set the scene for decades of socially and economically disastrous policies. Journalist Dan Baum wrote in an April cover story of Harper's about how he interviewed Ehrlichman in 1994 while working on a book about drug prohibition. Ehrlichman provided some shockingly honest insight into the motives behind the drug war. This is from Harper's. You want to know what this really was about, he asks, with the bluntness of a man who, after public disgrace and a stretch in federal prison, had little left to protect. The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and the criminalizing of both heavily, we could disrupt both of these communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. Of course we did. Where is it? We have over 130,000 people sitting in jail right now for drug crimes. There are more people arrested for marijuana than for all violent crimes combined. The pretext of this was purely for politically motivated. It was a political stunt. And because of the edifices and the organizations that have been put in place, like the DEA and cops, these maniacs with badges, they have been allowed to disrupt and destroy communities and destroy people's lives. One of the benefits, you can say, to the Republicans or to Nixon in this case, was that in destroying their lives, you also stole their vote. Meaning somebody is smoking pot, they're smoking a plant. An alcoholic cop can put that person in a jail cell for smoking a plant. And that person can lose their rights, meaning their capacity to vote. You are able to disrupt the communities in two cases. You're able to take them off the playing field, meaning these are agitators that you don't necessarily have to deal with politically. And you can also take away their capacity to affect their will in the political process through voting. Did the African American president know that? Did Kamala Harris know that in her capacity as Attorney General, that she expanded the number of people who she was putting in cages? Beyond did she know that, using the levers of government, allowing cops to steal property, like making her office, making these arguments, keep people in prison longer, it makes this statement that much more shallow and that much more shocking. The for-profit prison business is a billion-dollar industry. We can't let corporations keep exploiting human lives for profit. Maybe what she means is we can't let certain corporations that I am not okay with. I'm okay with cops exploiting lives for profits. I'm okay for cities exploiting lives for profits. I'm okay with keeping people in prison, or at the very least my office that I ran was okay with keeping people in prison for longer in order to fight fires or for cheap labor. Fucking amazing. Can't believe she's going to put out a tweet like this. She's catching flames. And there's more. After 13 years in prison, a man found innocent of a crime is freed. Now, the person who didn't necessarily want people to be exploited was perfectly okay with trying to keep somebody in prison who was supposed to be released. The man was in prison for 13 years. Kamala Harris's reason for keeping this person in prison, after it was very clear that this person was innocent, the judge deemed the man innocent. The court found that Larson had shown he was actually innocent, quote unquote, that the police officers at Larson's trial were not credible, and in this trial attorney was constitutionally ineffective for failing to call witnesses on his behalf. The cops were full of shit. The judge or the legal team that he had was completely inept. And the judge said this man is innocent. Kamala Harris wasn't having it. Her argument, however, wasn't that he wasn't guilty. Or her argument wasn't that he was guilty. Her argument was, but before he was released, California Attorney General Kamala Harris is challenging Larson's release, saying he hadn't presented proof that he was innocent quickly enough. The Innocent Project said, "You may be innocent, but you didn't tell me that you were innocent fast enough. So you need to stay in prison." Kamala Harris. This is a person that Democrats are pushing up to run in 2020. This is a person who they're pushing up saying that they've reformed. This is a person who shocked the shit out of her staff saying she's for Medicare for all, even though Chuck Schumer, the leader of the party, is not for Medicare for all. Her staff was shocked as shit to find out that she was Medicare for all. And with this disgusting record in California, they're pushing this woman up as being the next hopeful in 2020. The for-profit prison business is a billion-dollar industry. We can't let corporations keep exploiting human lives for profit. We've seen her allow Munich, that corporation, to exploit human lives for profit by kicking people out of those homes and forfeiting and illegally kicking people out their homes. We've seen her office make the argument that we need these inmates in those prison cells because those inmates work for dirt cheap, 8 to 37 cents an hour, apparently. We've seen her office make the argument, even though later on she says, well, I'm uncomfortable with the argument. But we've seen her office make that argument that we need to keep people in prison, even though the judge has said that keeping these people in prison is unconstitutional because the prisons are crowded. We need to keep these people in prison because they're cheap labor and we can get them to fight fires. We need their bodies to fight fires. We need to keep these people in cages. This is fucking outrageous that she's going to put a tweet like this or a quote like this. Not to mention, again, I keep making this point, being perfectly okay with cops stealing property. You haven't been charged of a crime. You haven't been charged of a crime. It's fucking amazing. My point in all this is, if they're going to put this woman up as a Democratic hopeful for 2020, if Tom Perez is going to consistently scream about his values and tell me, you know, we care about our values, we live on our values, it's about our values, I have nothing to judge you by but your works and the things that you do. What I see is a party, despite Kamala Harris's statement to the contrary, we can't let corporations keep exploiting human lives for profit. I've seen a party that said profits were more important than people and we need to keep these leeches into the medical process. So Obamacare, yeah, we're going to keep Obamacare. And Obamacare is essentially going to be a market-driven solution to healthcare, which was really just a Republican healthcare plan. Because it is more important to keep corporations into this process, raping the public in the most heinous of ways. There is nothing more personal to you than your avatar. It's like your intelligence, your consciousness is grafted onto this thing. When you feel bad, when you feel sick, when you feel injured, when you break something, when you hurt something, you alone are suffering in agony. There's nobody else that's suffering in that pain. Somebody may feel for you, but you yourself are in that universe of one. And in this very specific case, they're saying, I am okay. I'm okay with some for-profit business to be, what do you need? What do you need? You have a broken bone? Come on. You're going to be a tool to which we're going to gain profit off of. So Democrats are okay with that. They're okay with that. They're okay with this other stuff. For-profit prisons was given to Hillary Clinton, by the way. And I've made this point. I'm not going to go through each of these again. But in each case, some structure is raping the ordinary person. Whether it's cops murdering human beings, whether it's cops stealing property, whether it's not prosecuting crime, whether they're kicking people out of their homes, whether it's making legal arguments in order to keep people in prison longer than what they should be in prison. It's fucking amazing. Tell me of your values. Tell me of your goddamn values. If these are your values, no thank you. No thank you. All of these people are screaming in the Unity Commission trying to get people into the party. What you haven't explained to me is why I should care that you want people into the party. Meaning, if you're going to tell me what you represent, and you're going to say that what we represent based on our values, and the person who you're putting up is Kamala Harris as being the token of the party, the person who's going to lead you forward, then that is sad and pathetic. And that shows that it's status quo 101. Nothing has changed. Continuing with identity politics. Continuing with somebody who's creating a facade that doesn't necessarily live up to the facade that that person is creating. It is an amazing fucking quote. The for-profit industry is a billion-dollar industry. We can't let corporations keep exploiting human lives for profit. And yet that is exactly what Democrats do. It is exactly what Kamala Harris has done. Whether it's corporations, whether it's cops, whether it's the state of California, it doesn't necessarily matter. You still have some structure, some edifice that's above the human being in this kind of hierarchical structure that's taking advantage of the person. And ultimately, Kamala Harris was the backer of this particular power source. She would never get my vote. There's another instance that I didn't pull up where she had the opportunity to take Exxon to court. Didn't go through with it the moment that she got elected and she needed the money. Look at this for the moment. Most serious effects of human activities on Earth are getting worse. Now, 50% of the extinctions that have taken place over the last 50 years. Think about that. Think about that. If you were in a zoo and 50% of the animals in that zoo just vanished, what would you think? Would you be alarmed by that? For whatever reason, humanity is not all that alarmed by the number of people that have, or the number of species that have disappeared off this planet. Human beings don't seem to be alarmed by the agriculture issue, meaning animal agriculture is just as much of a driver for climate change issues as gas and oil. If you're putting that person in office and you have these things that are disastrous, I mean, you're talking about a capitalistic system that is rapacious and is destroying this globe, one indicator after the next. You have 50% of the goddamn species vanish. I've done reports where they've shown studies where the nutritional density of food has gone down. In this particular case, they're talking about the volume of the oceans completely devoid of oxygen has almost quadrupled over the last 50 years, a new scientific study has revealed. They're looking at climate change issues and they're showing that climate change is worse, or at the very least it's on the worst case scenario, if that makes sense. Meaning they were undervaluing how bad it was going to be. You're presented with these issues. You're even presented with economic issues. People don't care about the global or climate stuff. Take this stuff off the table. Economics. You have jobs that are being drained from the country just based on natural capitalistic forces. You have situations where people or workers are being exploited. You have unions being decimated. You don't even have the situational edifice in place that would allow the growth of unions. It is not even in the platform to allow this either worker co-ops or something to revitalize that particular sector of the community. What is your solution to this stuff? The only solution, or the only thing that I hear, is we're against Donald Trump. That doesn't tell me anything. And looking at your record, which you guys screaming about your values, I don't know what your values are. What I've seen so far, at least if your values are based in Kamala Harris, that is embarrassment. That is a right-wing policy. I mean, literally, this is stuff that the right wing would love. She's so obsequious to cops in this. I mean, you had somebody that murdered somebody And she still supported the guy that murdered the other person. You ever making arguments on trying to keep people in prison when it was very clear that that person shouldn't have been in prison? The person was in prison for goddamn 13 years. And then you're going to make an argument saying, well, wait a minute, he needs to stay in prison because he didn't say that he was innocent fast enough. Tell me of your values. Tell me of your values. It's fucking amazing. And people are supposed to go to the polls and vote Democrat. Why? Why? Explain to me. Why? Why? I have no expectation of you doing anything about climate change. I have no expectation of you doing anything of merit about climate change. I understand Trump is bad about it, but what does it matter if you hit the wall at 100 miles per hour versus 60? What does it matter? I understand that Trump is going to open up these oil pipelines, but you're acting as if the Democratic Party didn't do the same. I understand that they gave this gross tax cut, but you're asking as if Democrats weren't going to do the same. They might not have been to the degree that Republicans were going to do, but they still were going to give a tax cut. This stuff is an extension of the previous presidency. And ultimately, the parties are so closely aligned together that identity is really the only thing that they could talk about. Otherwise, they end up just being fucking hypocrites. Fucking amazing. The for-profit prison business is a billion-dollar industry. We can't let corporations keep exploiting human lives for profit. Whether it's corporations, whether it's the state, it's kind of besides the point. If you're allowing cops, if you're allowing the state of California, if you're allowing anything, well, whether even, and in this case, I mean, this is even hypocritical because she does allow corporations. She was allowing Munich to kick people out their homes. Illegally, by the way, and let him off the hook. He thanked her for it, though. He gave her a campaign donation. So, good for that. I'm just saying this is bogus. If you want to know what the Democratic Party represents, look at what they do. Don't look at it judging on the curve or grading on the curve. Look at what they do. And ask yourself the basic question. Should I be complicit in allowing this party that in no way does things that need to be done, in no way represents the interests of the public? Do you honestly believe that the American public wants cops stealing from them? Do you believe that? They haven't been convicted of a crime and the cop can take it upon himself to just steal their property. Do you honestly believe that the American public is okay with keeping people in prison when it's clear that those people are innocent? Do you believe that the American public want this kind of legal system that keeps people who don't have means in prison longer than what they should be, but at the same token lets off the powerful? Do you believe that that's what the American public wants? I would say that's not what the American public wants. So, this idea of Democrats being somehow better or superior, all this other stuff, the real question boils down to is, do we have problems in our society? Do we have problems in our world? And do those problems need to be addressed? And if those problems are not being addressed by either party, and the party that is philosophically bent in a way that is supposed to address those parties or problems is the faux left, the Democrats, and they're not doing it, should you be complicit in voting for somebody who's not representing your interests? And do you believe that voting for somebody who's not representing your interests in any way will entice them to actually represent your interests? The capacity and the willingness to say no is where it starts. It has to start at no. So this one went a little bit longer than I wanted, but it was a lot of content to go through. So let's see. Oh wow, we have 5 minute people here. Let's see. I'll start in the middle somewhere. Susie Potatoes, they have no values. No, they don't have values. I mean, basically what they call centrists is this idea of we have a left, meaning an actual left, and you have corporatists. And you have these guys who stand in the center who call themselves, you know, well, we have our values and everything else, and we're going to talk a particular way. But ultimately, what it really boils down to is we're going to get paid to do certain things. And we're practical. So the money that we get, we have to lean in the direction of the money. Otherwise, we're not going to get the cash. And we need that cash to run and get elected. So the way we square these two pegs, meaning the way we square this between the lefties who actually care about things, who believes in real things and want to get actual things done from the standpoint of policy in this country, you parrot those things, but you lean towards the cash, with this idea of making incremental changes that in no way adversely affects the money source that you get. They would call this practical, and they would call themselves centrists. Ultimately, they're just bought. And they're gone into this Faustian bargain of, we can take a large amount of cash and we can do these tepid measures around the edges that don't in any way affect the cash. Because if we do anything major, and if it affects that cash, then we are no longer going to get that cash. And that cash is going to be used against us by people who don't necessarily have any level of value system, who have a value system that is less than our own. That's really what politics boils down to on the left in regards to Democrats. That's what it boils down to. You have pitchforks or you have dollars. Up to this point, you've had no pitchforks. And people have been so complicit that they have voted for one Democrat, random Democrat after the next, because they were terrified of Republicans. So you had Bill Clinton decimated welfare. 70% of those people were kids. You had Bill Clinton decimated the telecommunications industry, decimated the financial sector, destroying Glass-Steagall. This was a Democrat. Passing NAFTA, passing a crime bill. The biggest issues that Bill Clinton did were right-wing issues. Right-wing. A Democrat. A Democrat. When Obama got in office, he enshrined the things that Bush did in that office, meaning the gross things that Democrats complained and screamed about for Bush, Obama essentially shrined it and managed it. So this war on terror expanded to 7 wars. The drones that Bush was doing expanded into multiple countries. The assault on civil liberties expanded under Obama. I mean, come on. Come on. If you're going to make this argument that people should vote Democrat or the Democrats are somehow better, I'm going to make the point that Democrats are worse. They are supposed to represent something philosophically different, and they don't. And the idea that you're going to vote for them and be complicit in voting for them when they're not representing those things. It's like a guy's supposed to be mowing my lawn. He doesn't mow my lawn, but I give him $10 anyway for not mowing my lawn. Yeah, he's going to keep showing up. And yeah, he's going to tell me whatever he needs to tell me, even when he's not mowing my lawn, because I keep giving him the money for mowing my goddamn lawn. I mean, come on. Lorms won. Love the show. Oh, thank you, Lorms. I appreciate it. Guys, when I do, I usually do my talking points in the beginning, and then I turn around and do the conversation at the end. If I miss your donation, I am so sorry. And if you guys donate Super Cash and I completely miss it because I'm not paying attention to it, just put my name in the thing, and I'll look back at the tweet itself. The Super Cash thing fades after a while, but if you just, write my name, I'll look back at the points where my name is mentioned. Lorms, thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate it. All cops are criminals. Wake y'all up. Cops are criminals. I agree. You put a thug with a gun and you give him all of this power, and she's one to go to this point of giving him more power to just steal property. There's a story in Alabama where the judges and the cops had got together and came up with some scheme. Yeah, here it is. Alabama town revolts after mayor, judge, prosecutors, and cops set up a scam to rip off citizens. The police department of a small Alabama town was nearing bankruptcy due to a lack of ticket revenue, according to AL.com. The cash-strapped department and city council took drastic measures with asset forfeiture program for those caught speeding. Now the mayor of the city is blaming the bad press about the sketchy scheme as a 7-plaintiff lawsuit for a drop in revenue. Think about that. Think about that. We're not going to charge people what we need to charge them in order to keep our city running. Understand what's being said. The tax revenue of the city, in order to keep the city running, we're not going to charge people the taxes. We're not going to get taxes from plutocrats in the way that we're supposed to in order to keep our city running. So what we're going to do is we're going to attack the least of us. We're going to attack the least of us. We're going to attack the citizens. We're going to pull people over. We're going to steal their property from them. Think about that. Think how fucked up that is. Think how fucked up that is. The idea that you as an American citizen, and you supposedly, quote unquote, in the land of the free, can be driving your car, minding your business. And even if you're speeding, even if you're going a little bit over the speed limit, the idea that a cop can stop you and take something from you when you haven't been convicted or even charged of a crime is abysmal. That is some shit you'd see in some military dictatorship. When I was in Egypt, we were in a car, we were driving, we were going to this thing called the Blue Hole. And as we were going to the Blue Hole, there's military personnel all around Egypt at the time. They would just be walking around with these weapons, these massive machine guns. There'd be military checkpoints. And as we were passing one of the military checkpoints, the guys in the car clearly were aware of the fact that this was a military checkpoint. And they, I guess straightened themselves up as they were going through the checkpoint. One of the guards stole one of their lighters. Now, this is small. This is not a massive thing to steal one of their lighters. And the guys in the car pull out another lighter, laughing, saying, this asshole, we got another one. What if that was $500? What if that was $500? If this was America, yeah, they could take that from you. If it's $200 in a car, they can steal that from you. Is that a power that you want your cops to have? Do you want your cops to have body cameras? Meaning, do you want to be on a dark road with some cop one-on-one? Is that something that you want? Do you want civilian oversight of these? If you were murdered by a cop, if your kid was murdered by a cop, if your mom, uncle, aunt was murdered by a cop and that kid was unarmed, would you want some kind of oversight of the fact that that took place? Meaning an independent oversight. If those answers are yes, which I would imagine for the majority of the public those answers are yes, then this woman is completely out of line with your values. Annoys the shit out of me. D. Scully, you must have donated. I'm related to a super delegate, and I am not hounded. Brom SO1, J. Scott, there, I have to disagree with you. Jake Smith. Caitlin just released another Medium article you'll be proud of. Damn it, shifted. Just a few minutes ago. Dax Jacobson, most Americans are not stable geniuses who can figure this stuff out. We need to start a free hint hotline. Tabitha Enriquez, Democratic Socialists are soft socialists, more like Democrats. They're better than Democrats. Come on. They're better than Democrats. You can't even get Chuck Schumer to be on board for single-payer health care. The majority of Americans are on board with this idea of government-run health care. Chuck Schumer, most Democrats can't even get on board for that. And another point. This. Here, the 19 Senate Democrats still not committed to defending net neutrality. Cory Booker, Tom Carper, Bob Casey, Chris Coons, Catherine Cortez Masto, Joe Donnelly, Dianne Feinstein, not surprised. Heidi Heitkamp, not surprised. Doug Jones, damn sure not surprised. Joe Manchin, not surprised. Claire McCaskill, not surprised. Bob Mendez, not surprised. Chris Murphy, Patty Murphy, Bill Nelson, not surprised. Tina Smith, John Tester, not surprised at all. Tom Udall, and of my home state, the embarrassing Mark Warner. Are you telling me that Democratic Socialists of America would not be on board for protecting net neutrality? Or for that matter, expanding the defense or the protection of the internet? You can't even get Democrats to get on board. The FCC has the capacity to Congress has the oversight of rulings made by the FCC, meaning Congress can overturn the ruling that other IG pot put through. The question becomes, are you going to have enough Democrats to get on board for it? They can overturn it with a simple majority. I thought Democrats were for net neutrality. I thought they were for net neutrality. Explain to me. Explain to me. I understand that there are incremental differences, meaning one is better, but that's not really my point. My point is, this is not on the curve. This is what are the changes you want in your country. And do you honestly believe that consistently going with this basic bare minimum incrementalism that's consistently rolled back the moment that a Republican gets in office and anywhere deals with the main issues that your country or your world is facing? You understand we are a ball hurling through the goddamn cosmos. There is an ecosystem to which we have to deal with. We go through our lives, going through our jobs and, looking at our football games, playing our Xbox. There's a larger reality out there. Meaning our habitat is being destroyed by the things that we're doing. Even from an economic standpoint, we are making our lives extraordinarily difficult. Each and every one of us are vulnerable, and we're making our lives difficult. And the belief that putting a Democrat in that office in any way solves or fixes or even incrementally goes to any of that is a farce. It's a farce. Yeah, it is a farce. This fucking annoys me. I understand that people get terrified of Republicans, and you should be. They're off the fucking political spectrum. But you understand that part of the reason they're off the political spectrum is because they're keeping a certain balanced distance from the other party. As Democrats slid to the right, when they started taking all of this cash, all of this campaign money, they slid to the right. What do you think Republicans are going to do? Do you think that Democrats are going to slide to the right and Republicans are going to say, well, hey, I mean, fuck, I mean, since we just agree on this, let's just, be kumbaya? Or do you think they're going to say, thank you for the gains. Thank you for sliding to our 50-yard line. Now we're going to move to our 20-yard line and we're going to try to get more. If that's true, which it is, what's your solution to that? Is your solution to continuously support Democrats in them not supporting you? Or is your issue to say no and to actually hold them accountable, meaning being willing to let them fail, being open and honest about being willing to let them fail, to be unambiguous about being willing to let them fail? Because I guarantee you nothing changes unless they understand that they can fail. They've lost 1,100 seats all throughout the United States. They've lost the House, the Senate, and the Supreme Court. The only reason you're having this conversation about a unity commission right now is because of failure. That's it. The problem, however, is people are terrified of Trump. People only look through elections from one election cycle, meaning they're just going to run back to the Democrats because they were scared of Trump, in which case they're going to run back to Republicans because they get annoyed with Democrats for being feckless and weak. At some point, this has to change. This is tiring. The thing that changes it is being willing to say no. Being willing to say, yes, you're going to fail. Until you represent the interests, you're going to fail. And this is not just politics. This is because there are real world implications for the decisions that we make in this country. Our society is not done by an act of God. The society is done by policy choices. If you're going to give some massive amounts of cash at the expense of others, then yeah, you're going to have people with massive amounts of debt. You're going to have people going belly up. You're going to have massive amounts of income, of poverty in your country. You're going to have income inequality that spikes to a level that is unprecedented. That was under a Democrat administration. Those administrations are just extensions of the prior administrations, whether it's Democrat or Republican. I understand. Believe me, I understand Republicans are batshit crazy. I get it. I get it. My question is, if you believe in climate change, if you believe it's a real thing, then you believe that there's an asteroid that's going to hit the planet. And if you believe there's an asteroid that's going to hit the planet, and one party says we don't even believe there's an asteroid at all, and the other party is shuffling deck chairs, what does it matter if one party said they don't believe it and another party doesn't do anything about it? What doesn't matter? Aren't you going to get hit by the asteroid in both cases? If one party is doing massively inadequate stuff because they want to keep corporate profits, the stupidity of that in and of itself is flamboyantly stupid. You're essentially saying, I believe that there's a cataclysmic thing that's going to take place, but corporate profits are massively important. Corporate profits aren't even real. So we're not going to do about the massive fucking cataclysmic thing that's going to hit our planet. If you say climate change is real and you still don't do anything about animal agriculture, then how are you saying the things are real? If you're selling fracking all over the world, how are you selling it's real? If you're saying that we don't want corporations to be able to essentially take advantage or keep exploiting human lives for profit, then how are you calling yourself a capitalist? The entire capitalist system is based on this idea of exploitation of labor. You have these two elements in your party where you have corporations and you have people who are further on the left, or you have plutocrats and people who are further on the left. Do you honestly believe that there's some center point between those things? What we've seen is, based on the New Deal, plutocrats have reached into the political process and tried to claw back each and every gain that has taken place, oftentimes using Democrats as being the avatar of the thief in the night. You can't have it both ways. Either you have a party that represents workers, or you have a party that represents plutocrats. And right now, this party, even Kamala Harris herself, represents plutocrats. The game plan is always and remains the same. You say one thing, you say some stuff that's somewhat lefty and all this other stuff, but ultimately at the end of the day, you're going to your donors, and your donors are going to give you a large amount of cash under the pretext that under the idea that don't bring up class. Keep your mouth shut about class. You can have these little things like this, but ultimately at the end of the day, what you're going to do is not going to be in the interest of the things that you're saying. It's going to be in the interest of the people who are paying you. That's the honest to God truth of democratic politics. And I'd argue that you would see that effect in Obama and through Clinton. And you would have seen it in Clinton. So. And the duopoly by letting GOP keep winning. Jay Scott. Well, let me ask you this, Jay. You believe that by consistently putting in Democrats who don't represent your interests, that something is going to somehow change. That's your belief. That's a comically ridiculous belief. I'm sorry. I don't mean to be brutal about it. But what you're essentially saying is you should always vote Democrat because Republicans are horrible. That's your strategy. That's a ridiculous strategy. If they know your vote is a can vote, meaning if they know you're going to get your vote regardless, they don't have to represent your interests. They know that at the end of the day, you're so terrified of Republicans, you're going to always come back. It's like the abused spouse, like the political, the political abusee, essentially a person in Stockholm syndrome. No, we're not going to get the things that we want. No, they're not going to do the things that they actually need to do for the economic reasons or environmental reasons. Nope. They're going to be completely feckless. They're going to be worthless. They're not going to do the job that they're put in to do. But Republicans are insane. So I'm forced to vote for this person who in no way is going to do what I need that person to do. The point of this is they represent your interests so they don't get your vote. And your argument is Democrats would never represent your interests, so Republicans would consistently win. And if that's your argument, that's more of a reason to not vote for Democrats. It's more of a reason to not vote for them. Like, why are you voting for somebody who doesn't represent your interests? And the idea that you have this argument of, well, look, they're never going to represent your interests. So there's never going to be a situation where you're going to be able to vote for them if you keep that argument of either they represent your interests or they don't get your vote. So, because they're never going to represent your interests, you got to vote for them. Yeah, we're in disagreement on that, Jay. We're in vast disagreement on that. Election laws and machines are changed with statewide petitions and concerted pressure. My argument is the whole system has to die. You missed my point, Jamal. Jay Scott, on that point, I agree with you. The entire system has to die. But you honestly believe that the entire system is going to die by consistently voting for Democrats. This is where I miss you at. I don't understand that particular point. The whole system needs to die. Agreed. Agreed. We've reached agreement. The question becomes, how do you affect that? You're either going to affect that through third party, or destroying the Democratic Party, or going out the political apparatus itself, which is, for all intents and purposes, this kind of revolution and changing the entirety of the thing. If you're talking about something that takes place in the political process, meaning if you're not at overturn everything, run to your local post office, blow the shit up, if that's not where we're at, and we're still having a conversation about the political apparatus, certainly you don't believe that consistently voting for Democrats when Democrats, for the most part, are doing this kind of scheme of least worse. We don't have to do anything. We don't have to articulate anything. We don't have to believe anything. We just need to be against the other guy, and we can be graded on the curve as better. The Republicans get a 20, Democrats get a 25, and they say, woo! We got an A! Grading on the curve. Grading on the curve. GOP keeps winning, makes no sense. It's not that I want them to win. D. Scully, you can't reinstall democracy through a democratic process, Jamal. It can only be restored through revolution. D. Scully, I don't disagree with you. The question becomes, what does that revolution look like? I guess that's what it boils down to. What does that look like? And maybe that's what we are, Jay Scott. What does that look like? Both parties have to die at the same time. How? I don't know how you do that. I don't know how you do that. Unless you're talking about a third-party system where something springs up and the public becomes aware. I don't know how you do that. I don't know how you do that. We have revolution. you have no disagreement with me with this idea of revolution. The question becomes, what does it look like? What does it look like? We're in agreement. We don't know. I don't know either. I don't know either. Blah, blah. Jay Scott, what is your plan? You've said nothing in the past 30 minutes. Blah, blah. To be fair to Jay Scott, I gotta be honest, I don't know either. Like, my argument would be, you start at no. You start at being willing to say no. And if you're talking about millions and millions and millions of people being pulled out of political process, is that a revolution? Like, having the capacity to say no. Having those millions of people to see themselves as being united, meaning it's not just a faction. It's people not going to work, people marching, people protesting, people saying, I am done with this, people flooding Washington. Is that what you're talking, like, is that what a revolution looks like? Is that what a revolution looks like? Vote GOP or third party, that's really our only trust at this point unless we're going to have a real revolution. Brahma, so one, I am not voting Republican. Those people are batshit crazy. Like, I take no, yeah, I will in no way assist Republicans in regards to their voting. By the same token, I will vote for third parties because I think, you know, that nobody has a nobody owns the political apparatus. Nobody owns it. I think you need to infiltrate both parties to get your message out there. People respond to colors and brainwash society. If you observe both neoliberal parties, they both create neoliberal consensus. Bonnie Florino. If flocks haven't gotten off their arses yet, I hear you, Jamal. How much worse does it have to get? And that's the question. That's the question. That is the fundamental question. Like, I tend to believe the revolutions happen when it gets to a point that there's like an intermediary point. I think people respond under natural forces. When it gets to a point that you have a certain amount of the population that's under stress, and that stress, they don't see it getting better, and it becomes more advantageous to rebel than it is to comply, that's when you get your revolution. The question becomes, what is that point? If you had to put that point on a map, if you had to put a pain point on a map, how do you articulate that pain point, and what does that pain point look like? How many people do you need to be in shitty jobs? And how many people, what's the point where people realize, oh my God, we're being exploited and we're being had? I don't know what that point is. I would imagine, personally, I would have thought that point was 10 years ago. I would have thought that point was under Obama, where you had Occupy Wall Street and you had all of these people rising up. The Democratic president beating down or working with elements in order to suppress this movement that's asking, or that's making this point of, we are the 99% and we need to be represented. And the Democratic Party feeling threatened by that. So much so, Obama passed in the National Defense Authorization Act, allowing them to declare those people terrorists and put those people in black sites. Not to mention put military on home soil. That was Obama, by the way. That wasn't Bush. Yeah. Bob Ramirez said, Jamal hands are too dainty to make a difference. I should flip out like Timberlake and be like, dainty? What do you mean by dainty? Just lose it. Just lose my shit. It's funny. No, I don't think we need a republic anymore. We can vote by referendum and cut out the representative. Everything put to a referendum and voted on to secure the Ethernet. Dude, is that something you really want to do? I mean, do you really want to be involved in each and everything that takes place? That would be a pain in the ass. It's like, you get up in the morning, there's some kind of referendum, you go somewhere else, there's another referendum, somebody else wants to do, there's another referendum. There is advantages to representative government. People just need to be intact and have structures in place that can recall those representatives when they're not representing their interests. That's all. The referendum thing sounds nice, but I would imagine that would be a pain in the ass at a certain point. I signed up for you, Jamal. Don't hate you. Just so frustrated. Jay Scott, I don't think you hate me, dude. I agree with you, I think it's... Look, I think all of us, to some degree, feel a certain amount of frustration on this. All of us look at this and think to ourselves, this world doesn't have to be this way. And just being on the left, being the poets and the people who are agitators and the malcontents, we look at this stuff, we want this stuff to be different. This world doesn't have to be this way. That burns. Like, I think right-wingers look at the world and just assume that, you know, people are bad, people are horrible, they can be unempathetic, so fuck everybody else and everything else. But lefties, I think, are fundamentally different on this. I think we look at this from this empathetic way of people are suffering, the environment is suffering. We're a ball hurling through the cosmos, and it's very possible that this habitat can be undermined or destroyed, in which case we're going to lose life on this planet. And people are suffering. People are homeless. You have some people who have billions of dollars. You have other people who have nothing. And you look at this and say, I want this to change. I want this to be fundamentally different. And you realize that the political apparatus, the financial apparatus, none of these things are fundamentally real. All of these things are tricks of the mind, meaning you've convinced people to come up with a scheme that allows some people to get massive amounts of cash while other people get very little. And in coming up with this type of scheme, you've normalized people into the scheme to make them think that this is fair, this is earnest, this is the way the world is, etc., etc., etc. When you're not a part of that process, meaning when you're not tricked by that, when you're not tricked by the exploitation, when you don't have this kind of false consciousness in the way that you work screaming about freedom while at the same time being a debt slave, it's aggravating. And it's one of those things where people want to change. And I'm with you on this. I agree with you on this. It's aggravating. It's an aggravating fucking thing. I passed 3 or 4 people who were homeless on my way to the store the other day. We were having an ice storm in Richmond. And those guys were outside sitting in the cold with a blanket. The world doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have to be this way. You walk into any random store, any CVS, and you have all of this plastic shit that nobody buys. You have all of this candy and all these goods and surplus needs and all this stuff. Most of the stuff nobody buys, nobody wants. They bake this stuff purely for the sake of profit when things that actually need to be made with those materials, like houses and clothing or whatever else, for people who actually need those things. Not so much. If you can't make a profit off of it, then there's no point in doing it, which is somewhat problematic because there are plenty of things that you probably need that you can't necessarily make a profit off. One thing I would say is not having people sleeping outside when it's snowing. These are laws. This is not done by God. These are laws. So J. Scott, I feel you on this. I think we agree on this. I think we hit our head on this thing of what do you do about it? And my first impetus, or my first thought about this, and not just my first thought, I've thought about this a lot. It really does start with being able to say no. There are no easy ways out. There's no magical door, if that makes sense. Meaning human civilization doesn't necessarily function well with these kind of massive changes in the way things are. They tend to be somewhat incremental and tend to move in a direction. If you're talking about change after allowing the country to drift as far as it drifted, it's like paying a bill. It's like, you know, it's like you have this bill that you need to pay and you don't pay it for 10 years and then you go back and pay it and the thing is astronomical. And the first few payments hurt like nobody's business because you let it go for so long. Or it's like having an illness where you have this kind of sore that you just let fester for God knows how long. And then when you finally start trying to treat it or do something, it hurts like hell. It's extraordinarily expensive. It leaks, it bleeds. And you think sometimes like, God damn it, I shouldn't have did anything to it. It was better when I was just leaving it, let him cut my leg off. But at some point, going in a particular direction, you realize, okay, this is getting better. This is getting better. There's just no magical door. This is the same way with the political thing. We've allowed this cancer that is this party, that is supposed to represent one thing, it represents something completely different, to be taken over by plutocrats. And it being taken over by plutocrats allow them to continuously parrot the things of FDR and these other lefties. There is no magical door to fix that. Ultimately, if you're confronting that, you're playing this kind of game of chicken of saying, you are going to lose. You're going to consistently lose. You're going to lose forever until you do something different, and I am okay with dealing with the consequences of your loss. How do you change something? If you're willing to be complicit and give it your vote. I guess that's my point. That's what I boil down to. How do you change it if you're willing to give it your blanket support? And I don't see a situation where both fail at the same time. I don't know how that looks. If you're talking about a third party doing it, if you're talking about a mass uprising, agreed. If you can get 1 million people in one city or state after the next, if you can get massive amounts of people going to the White House and flooding the White House, you can get your change. You can get your change. I just don't know how to do that. Imagine how much the oligarchs would flip out if someone took a camera and recorded poverty all over America like an African documentary. They did it in Saudi Arabia and got arrested for waking people up. You know, the United Nations did come to the United States, and they were looking at third world levels of poverty in the richest country on the planet. Think about the ridiculousness of this. They're screaming about how awesome the stock market is. These things hitting 25,000. You haven't really seen the spike in jobs. So you ask the question, wait a minute. It seems like the stock market is completely disconnected from this idea of jobs, because the stock market is disconnected from this idea of jobs. The money that these guys are going to get, they're just going to inflate the stock market that much more, or they're going to put it in their pockets. You may have some that create a job or two, but ultimately they're going to put that money in their pockets. If you honestly really wanted to stimulate the economy, you give the money to the bottom part of the economy, the bottom 90%. The bottom 90% is in massive amounts of debt. They're struggling just to make ends meet, and they're going to just spend that money outright. That money being spent is going to go directly into the economy, meaning you're going to have a diffusion into the economy itself, which, guess what? It's going to go to businesses for services and all sorts of stuff, supplies and whatnot. If you want to really put money into the economy, if you want to do something about the poverty and everything else, you put that money in the bottom. You don't give it to the people at the top. Oh wow, this one is going an hour. Yeah, Jay, I agree with you, man. I know we bump heads on this sometimes. But look, bumping heads for me is not a bad thing, by the way. So I don't necessarily take it as we disagree on something because we disagree on something. You're a horrible person. That doesn't cross my mind at all. This is a political conversation and a political discussion, and I empathize and I give the benefit of the doubt. It's hard to give the benefit of the doubt sometime online because you don't necessarily know the quantity you're dealing with. But I try to give the benefit of the doubt that if you're on my channel, you're probably going to think in a similar way, at the very least similar in some ways or enough of ways, where you found something that I said or some philosophical point that I made pressing enough where you're listening to whatever I'm saying. I don't take disagreements as being you suck, you're a horrible person. At least not most of the time. And particularly on this, I just find this to be a political thing of how do you move forward? How do you change the way things are? And I think that's the question. What's to be done? What's to be done? So, all right, guys, I am going to end this Keynesian economics. Yeah, John Maynard Keynes. Yeah, Keynesian economics during the FDR era. I would go further than that, I guess. Look, to me, money isn't real. I mean, it's not real. I mean, you can use anything and say this thing has value. It's a figment of our imagination, something that we use just in this game space itself. So it's a little weird to me that we allow somebody to sleep on the street, a real person, a real flesh and blood human being that experiences cold and loss and sorrow and embarrassment and all of these other human emotions, while at the same token allowing somebody else to have $1 billion. The $1 billion is not real. That person's suffering is immensely real. There's no situation where you should ever have somebody in your society with that much while somebody else is so little, particularly for something that's not real. So, Alex1239, yeah, that's why I prefer anarchist communism since it's decentralized power. Yeah, but how do you deal with issues in that case, like the Syrian refugees? So you have all of these people flooding into the country. The United States goes into Iraq, creates a fuckfest in the Middle East. The United States goes into Syria, undermines that government. You have people streaming out from that civil war. Well, civil/proxy war. And they stream into Europe. And if you were one country in Europe, would you be able to deal with the number of refugees that were coming in? You had all of Europe, and all of Europe was being destabilized by the number of refugees that was coming into the country. As an anarchist communism, with these small communes, How do you deal with something that's massive and expansive that works on a global level? Climate change, for that matter. How do you deal with climate change from the small point of these small systems? I guess what I'm saying is, at some point, some edifice needs to be created. I agree with you. I don't like this larger hierarchical thing. And maybe the solution is having these kind of smaller communes that interact with larger communes, you know, these small communities, kind of like a Jack Fresco where the city itself is a city center with this one world thing. But we have issues on a global scale that we need to deal with. And we're fucking around and pretending that these imaginary lines that we draw as if it's one country or the next are real things. These things are not real things. They're legal fictions. So come on. Come on. Let's see. Soup packets and postage stamps. An entire system is built on them. What did Dominique say? Somebody saying that was a nightmare. Oprah Hillary 2020. Oh God, no. 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 You're being blacklisted from my chat. You're being blacklisted. There's no fucking way. Anarchist communist systems can federate. Yes. Think the internet community that can easily mobilize. Ah, I see. Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Fair enough. Alright, guys. I'm going to end this. My powers are fading. I have one or two more that I want to do, but I may do those off just locally. So, guys, thank you for those that have donated. If I missed any that donated, I am sorry. Let me check, see if anybody did a name thing. Dax Jacobson, Jamal, will your hand even be able to choke a banker? Think how nice that would be. Jamie Dimon turning blue as you squeeze the life out of him. Eat the rich. I'm not choking anybody. I'm saying eat the rich. Eat the fucking rich. The question that people never ask is, how were those resources acquired in the first place? Nobody ever asks that. No one ever brings that up. How were those resources acquired? Meaning, who was the person who gave those resources away? Who was the first human? Who was the first guy who said, look, I'm going to bequeath this plot of land to you? Anything that was taken was stolen by blood and by steel. And in stealing it by blood and steel, at some point, they would put in laws that says, all right, now that we've stolen this, this is a rule set that we're going to use to enshrine our advantage. This stuff is full of illusions. These things aren't real. This world should be common heritage, meaning the properties or the resources of this world should be for everybody of this world. If we have the technical acumen to make sure that nobody starves and nobody sleeps rough, then we should use the technical acumen for those things. Using that acumen to create these little stupid fucking devices that they put in drugstores and all this other stuff is a waste of skill. It's a waste of skill and manpower. We have the capacity to make sure everybody has the things that they need. We have the resources to make sure people have the things that they need. We have the technical acumen to make sure everyone on this planet has the things that they need. If they do not, it is a choice. Your world can be any way you want to arrange your world, providing you're willing to deal with the consequences of that arrangement. It's like playing a chess game. I can play whatever opening I want. I just need to deal with the consequences, the weaknesses, and the strengths of that particular opening. People are normalized to the system. And because they're normalized, they think that this is just the way things are. They think this is normal. And they become somewhat fearful of other systems, and they're sketchy of other systems. But I think they need to have an honest look at what they're living in. And this is a terrifying reality. This is a terrifying existence. So I will leave it at that. Snork Y2K. It doesn't matter who had its first. International law for centuries was that if the locals were not Christian, it was open season on them, their belongings and their land that they stand on. Snork, that's kind of my point. Who was the first person who said, this is yours? There was nobody to do that. I mean, ultimately, anything that was taken was stolen. That's my point. And if all land that was taken was stolen, it's like somebody stealing your purse and then saying, well, it's my purse now that I have your purse. And I'm creating a law that says it's okay that I have this purse. That's effectively what's taking place. People have stole land. People with more power, more influence, more strength were able to steal land. And in stealing that land, they were able to put down a particular law for that particular land to enshrine their advantage. People are normalizing this. They think this is normal. But you have all of these resources on this planet, and they've come up with a game. That's what this is. This is game space. This is not a real reality. They've come up with a game space that allows them to chop up the resources in a way that some advantage themselves magnificently while others suffer. At some point, the society has to get to the point of saying, we're done with this game. It is time to come up with something new and something different, and we're going to share these resources with the people of this planet in a way that makes sure everyone on this planet have the things that they need, and more than that, can actually live. So, I will leave it at that. You look a little baked tonight. Now I'm straight. Now, Chris, I'm out. I'm out of my stash. I'm sober as sober can be. Sober as sober can be. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. I'll leave it at that. If anything, I'm also getting tired, so that's probably why. Many Pacific Islands did not allow any ownership, not even clothes on your back. You know, and I'll end it on this. We've become accustomed to owning stuff, so much so that we just have junk. The amount of shoes that I have, the clothes that I have, all of these things. Do you know that the United States throws away half of its food? Half. Up to half of the food in the United States gets thrown away, get wasted. You have starving people around the globe. If I remember correctly, it was like 60% of the people around the globe only made like $10 a day. That's the amount that we spend on a latte. That's the amount we spend on a latte. When the advertisement industry has gotten to the point where it's making as much as the production industry itself, meaning we've saturated this country with so much shit that they don't even need shit anymore. So we need to come up with an industry to convince people that they need more shit that they don't actually need. We've created machines that can spit out clothing and shoes and everything else. And yet you have people around the planet that are lacking shoes, that are lacking clothing, that are lacking homes, and that are lacking food. This seems an extraordinarily misplaced set of priorities. That's all. Alright guys, I am going to end it at this. I know I keep saying that. My wife always jokes me when I say that. She's like, well, you said you were going to end it 30 minutes ago, so I just left. Alex1239, humans can get along, but we have some greedy bastards and think that everything belongs to them. That's true, yes. There's a hegemonic view that markets are more important than human beings. If you ever got to the point where you can enshrine your society, a cooperative society, and get that society in a different mindset, where that becomes the norm, where you have this hegemonic view of human beings being more important than the other things, meaning your environment, a rational society. The world is a finite planet. If we're going to use the resources of the planet, we need to conserve those resources, and we need to make those resources available to each and every person, because we want human beings to be self-actualized. Meaning a human being can't be free if they don't have food, clothing, shelter, fresh water, and ultimately this thing of self-affirmation. Not being alienated from their labor, but doing something that affirms their existence. Yeah, that's, I mean, you're talking about like a Star Trek society of sorts, or Jack Fresco society. But yeah, it can happen, it can work. I just don't know how you transition into it. I suspect it would be extraordinarily calamitous to try to transition into that. Human beings are geared in a particular way. And human beings, for the most part, act based upon the way their society programs them to act. So how do you get them to act in a fundamentally different way without some kind of collapse? It's almost like you need the collapse for people to kind of reevaluate how they are, with the hopes that the next collapse brings about a more cooperative society. Yeah, that's morbid, I know, but I think it's true. So, alright guys, I'm going to end it at that. If you enjoy the content, feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you can always donate through Patreon or Super Cash. I know I emphasize that a little bit more now. I'm going to try to donate or dedicate more time to doing videos. And I'm also going to dedicate more time to doing items for Patreon. I appreciate the people who donate on Patreon, and I need to start showing it a little bit more. So there will be new videos that are just specifically on Patreon. One of the other things I saw where people will put a video on Patreon, like an interview or something, and have it available like a week later after it's on Patreon for a little bit. I don't know. I'm thinking of ways to expand the channel, monetize the channel a little bit more, because I want to invest a little bit more time into it. I want this to be something that's a little bit more, I guess, full-time-ish of sorts. So, all right, guys, I am going to end it at that. You guys have a good night. Thanks, guys. And for everyone that donated, thank you. I appreciate it.